Well, Gary, can I start by congratulating you and adding my words of support to what you said about David. It is a great pleasure to see you doing what you do, and congratulations on it. I also am thrilled because one of the things I find so impressive about you is the background from which you conduct your debate. As a builder, you really do understand that vital part of local government function, and I'm delighted to salute you in that context. Well, it's nearly 45 years since I first addressed conferences of this sort, and I'm not going to ask for hands up anyone who was around at that time. But I just want you to know what an extraordinary honor it is that you should have invited me to come and speak here today. And I have to make one thing very clear. I am not a member of the government or a minister. I am a special advisor. And as you know, special advisors are rather lower in the esteem than I was 45 years ago as a junior minister in the Department of the Environment. So anything I say is me. And let's have no issue about divisions or anything like that. I can only tell you what I think and what I see. But I also, thinking about this particular occasion, gave me the opportunity to treasure the memories of all the things that I had the privilege of doing with you, for you, some might say against you. But they were wonderful experiences. And I am going to spend just a little time at the beginning of my speech going through the history, because the history is actually the background to what is happening today. I was first elected to Parliament in 1966, and that coincided more or less with the publication of the Redcliffe-Maud report. The Redcliffe-Maud report, without doubt, is the overarching judgment about the structure and form and purpose of local government in my lifetime. I was Peter Walker's junior minister, and in those circumstances helped to steer through the 1980 Local Government Act, which, as you know, reduced 1,400 authorities down to somewhere over 400. I was involved in looking at different powers, at different tiers, at changing the boundaries. And this was a prelude to becoming Secretary of State myself in 1979, where the word that is stamped on my memory for what happened then was a new form of partnership in the context of government's relationship with local government. The garden festivals, the Urban Development Corporation, the derelict land, the urban grant, they were all ways of drawing the public sector and the private sectors together with the purpose of tackling local problems from a local perspective. And from all that, in my mind, came the concept of place-based policies. These were solutions that were not imposed, they were not designed in London, they were worked out and formulated and introduced locally, inspired there and driven there. But the fact that that can be so clinically described should not obscure the most profound change that I think can be traced back to the early 1980s. And that was the change in personal relationships between the private and the public sector. When I remember those early days, there was really a sort of dialogue of the deaf with representatives of those two great sectors of our economy shouting abuse at each other from the twin tops of mountains. By making them work together in the pursuit of the elimination of poverty or the recreation of derelict land, they became Bill and Ben. And that fundamental change, I think, has its origins in that time and is in many ways responsible for the remarkable progress which we're going to be talking about today. When I returned as Secretary of State in 1990, I remembered very clearly that most of what we'd been doing in the 80s had been about reclaiming derelict land. And that's quite easy in the sense that there are no people there. We tried to become more ambitious, and the introduction of City Challenge was about taking deprived communities and using the same processes of working together with locally inspired solutions to seemingly intractable urban populations. And that worked. Indeed, one of my most treasured memories is working with the leaders of Manchester on the rebuilding of that city centre after the bomb outrage. And it was the team that had done the Hume Estate reclamation that actually moved straight into the rebuilding of the centre of Manchester. So there is a history in all of this for me. And quite frankly, in 1997, the Conservatives lost the election, and you could be forgiven for having reasonably expected to have seen the back of me. But to my surprise, and I'm sure yours, it didn't quite work out that way. And it was David Cameron who invited me to come with him on a trip to Liverpool to see how that city was faring in contrast to the bleak days of the early 1980s. He invited me to work with Sir Terry Leahy, a Liverpudlian, on a report updating the one I did for the Margaret Thatcher in 1981 called It Took a Riot. And Terry and I did our report, and the differences between the two periods is very easily described. The 1981 report was all about everybody having a clear view about what was wrong. You, them, whatever it may be. It was always someone else. There was no local leadership that you could find, which is why I spent 18 months trying to find ways of indicating what could happen. The one that Terry and I did, we just sat and listened. And across the table, they came, one after the other, men and women of great distinction and experience, with their solutions as to what should happen in Liverpool. And all Terry and I did was to put it in a report and say to the Prime Minister, there you are, just let them get on with it. It led to one of the most extraordinary things that ever happened to me, which was the invitation to produce No Stone Unturned. And the enormities of that project I can describe in simple language, in that I was given a civil servant from every major government department and a clean sheet of paper. No one in government saw a word of that report before it was published. So I was given a freedom that I don't know has ever been accorded to someone in such a circumstance, using the whole resource of government to say what personally one thought. Well, there is a qualification in that. Everybody knew what I thought, so they knew what the conclusion of the report would be before they invited me to produce it. A great word of advice for all of you here. First reach a conclusion and then find the chairman of the committee to produce the report. But the report was accepted. And Greg Clark, who was then a Minister of State, concluded the city deals, the first of them with Liverpool, and then the growth deals across the country. And we saw the emergence of an agenda of devolution based on partnership between local and central government, between central government and the private sector involved through the local enterprise partnerships. And the one thing I think one should add at that stage, when one talks of devolution, it is not realistic to talk about freedom. This is a partnership concept. Central governments are elected and they are entitled to have their manifestos implemented. And it cannot be contemplated that there is a sense of freedom at a local level which can actually frustrate the clear mandate upon which governments are elected. But that now brings me to the opening of a new parliament this year. Everyone here has received an invitation from the government of unprecedented scope. It is true that Manchester is ahead of the game. But in saying that, let me also tell you of a speech, a remarkable speech by Peter Smith of Lee, Lord Lee, who is, of course, a local government leader in Manchester, who described the process by which Manchester concluded its earth-moving deal with the Chancellor. He said, it was a deal. We didn't like all of it, direct elected mayors, but the prize was so big that the deal was worth it. And I think that is the spirit in which this whole thing has to be seen. And I was very pleased to see someone who played such a formative role in the process put it in language which we can all understand. That's not the way Whitehall would have drafted it, but Peter, I think, put it as it was, the real world. So it's up to you, really. The offer is on the table. No threats, just opportunities. You design what you think is in the right interests of the communities you represent, based upon the strengths and opportunities that are there. Now, the opportunity is huge, but it is two-way. First of all, government has got to be persuaded, and in principle they are persuaded, to give up detailed control. But you have to prove that you can carry the responsibility of the administration of the services that are to be devolved. So it's a two-way process. They have to give up a certain amount. You have to show that you can carry that responsibility. And let me just reinforce what Gary said at his introductory remarks. In George Osborne, we have a Chancellor who, first of all, was amongst the first to accept the concept of my report. His speeches about the Northern Powerhouse are, in my view, unprecedented in a modern Chancellor of the Exchequer. His approach to the rest of England, all of England, is, my door is open. And he has appointed Jim O'Neill, who has done conspicuous work in furthering the cause of city regeneration, who was a distinguished banker with Goldman Sachs, and who was central to the thinking of the Manchester bid. He has been appointed to the Treasury. You can't ask for a clearer signal than that. There's Greg Clark, born in Middlesbrough, architect of the city deals, of growth deals in every part of England. He visited and concluded growth deals before the election, and the creation of growth hubs to give to the private sector in partnership with the public sector a one-stop shop process. There's an excellent team of ministers, and I won't name them all, but I must refer to Susan Williams, who of course was the ex-leader of Trafford. Now, I know these people. I am privileged to sit amongst them. It's not that they sort of get the message of devolution. Day by day, they are creating devolution. Of course, there will be ministers who've got questions about risking what they think they've achieved from decades of centralism. You would do exactly the same in their position. It's, after all, their careers that will suffer if the process goes wrong. But as I say, the government is committed to this offer. You've never had such an opportunity. And as I say, it is an opportunity from the greatest metropolitan centres to the most rural parts of England. All of them have been offered a process which we are discussing today. I see two hurdles which I would like to mention. The first is the cuts. I've no knowledge of what they will be or the scale of them. But I expect that they will be significant. They would have happened whichever government was elected. But that will not prevent the controversy, and only the most canute of politicians would expect otherwise. But the message that I want to leave with you today is a simple one. The controversy surrounding the cuts must not be allowed to obscure the huge benefits of the devolution agenda. And the second issue is restructuring. Now, it is idle to pretend that the government is going to devolve power back to the same structure of local government from which they have been taking it for decades. And you all know this. In every corner of the local government world, negotiations are afoot with this challenge in mind. You have to design structures. They may be called combined authorities, but you must design the structures that reflect your local economies. I have to say, harking back to the longevity of my position, I am intrigued by the backdrop of the 60-odd authorities that Redcliffe Maud delineated in the 1960s. And nor can I escape from the parallel between the structure of Redcliffe Maud and the structure of the local enterprise partnerships. But that is a personal reflection that I share with you. Now, I hope you will come forward with solutions that provide England with a democratically elected, locally administered framework that is competitive with what is found in most of our competitor international countries. For make no mistake, for Britain to win abroad, you have to be in the front line of our attack. And I make no apology for emphasizing your economic role. Transport, education, skills, housing, and much else are integral parts of our international competitiveness. And vital also is the newfound partnerships with the private sector and academia. The local enterprise partnerships are proving invaluable in making a reality of the devolution agenda. And to me, it would be inconceivable for them not to be bound in to your future visions. So, ladies and gentlemen, when I launched my report, No Stone Unturned, I deliberately chose the town hall of Birmingham, where Joseph Chamberlain so often spoke. Carefully, I included that most famous phrase of municipal pride and power. What Manchester thinks today, the world will think tomorrow. Great leaders, great vision. And I wish you well as you seek to grasp an opportunity that at the turn of this century would have seemed inconceivable. Thank you.